Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Second Chance Stories of Young Offenders. We're your hosts, Callista Lynn.
Akshay Keshri.
And Sophia Luisi, and today we've got another awesome individual for you all to meet.
As a dedicated sociology and behavioral sciences professor with a passion for social justice, she brings a wealth of academic expertise to the College of Marin. With a commitment to the Zero Textbook Cost Initiative, she ensures equitable access to education. Please welcome Susan Rahman.
Hi, Susan. We just wanted to first thank you for coming on to our podcast. We're so excited to hear about your ideas today.
Thank you for having me. This is really fun.
Thank you. So, in your journey of being the daughter of an immigrant and being a curious but not always a good student to becoming an educator, can you share a bit about yourself, a brief background, maybe, and a pivotal moment that influenced your dedication to pursue a career in sociology and behavioral sciences?
Awesome. Yes, of course I can. And I just love it that you did your homework. You guys are awesome. So I am a daughter of an immigrant. My father is a Palestinian immigrant. He came to the United States in the 60s and came here to get a better life. And, you know, as most immigrants choose to make that journey. I grew up in San Francisco and I didn't do that well in school. Like I'm just like I want everybody to understand that like there's always a second chance, right? I mean, not
Exactly.
right? So school wasn't my forte. I kind of liked it for a while, but then by the time I got to high school, I was just too busy doing other things and watching all my friends drop out around me. But I did have a mom who was like, no matter what, you really should go to college. And so that was always kind of in my brain, like that. It just sort of felt like that's what I was supposed to be doing. So I did end up going to a small California State University in the northernmost part of California, growing up in a very big city. I grew up in San Francisco. You know, in a time when it was a really nice time to be a teenager, but there was a lot of kind of things that got me distracted, a lot of, you know, activity, different gang stuff, just different things that sort of took me away from an academic focus. And so I did go away to college, and I went away kind of imagining I wanted to be a biology major for some random reason. I'm not even sure why. And I took my first biology class and I was like, oh, yeah, no, not so much. And so I found myself in a sociology class and I was like, what is this? This is like magic. This is totally speaking to me. I love it. And so I switched my major right away and I went on to, you know, get my BA in sociology and then continued on to get a master's in sociology and then a PhD in an interdisciplinary kind of combination of things, but sociology with a focus. And it's always been around social justice. Like all of my life, I've always been like interested in, you know, what are things that are problematic in the culture and what is my role as a human being on this planet to kind of participate in making it better. And I do think it partially comes from being Palestinian because our struggle is so prominent and so pervasive. And so, you know, having that background kind of fed me kind of this idea that you never get to just sit back. It's always your responsibility to do things. And so going on into like college and grad school, I did a lot of, you know, different activism pieces as, you know, student on campus, different social justice groups. And then I did my dissertation for my PhD on women who resist occupation in Palestine. And, you know, sadly, I'm still protesting the occupation of Palestine today. I just came from one to get here to come get on this podcast. So that's always been in the forefront of my kind of mindset, but I've done other racial justice kind of work, and I've worked in prison. I've worked at San Quentin State Prison, and I'm currently working with people in juvenile hall, and that's a big part of what I'm doing now. But Yeah, I mean, maybe I should pause there and see what you want to say next, because maybe I'm going on for too long.
No, that's okay. Can you clarify your role, by the way, at what you do at the prison, the San Quentin prison?
So currently I'm not there anymore, but I was a teacher there and I was a tutor there. So I was teaching incarcerated students Introduction to Sociology. So a similar class that I teach at College of Marin, like just a very introductory, like introducing people to sociology. And the beautiful thing about students in San Quentin is like they had so much kind of depth of understanding about sociology just from a like sort of grassroots kind of like that makes sense to me, you know, like lived experience, because sociology really is the study of society and the way we all kind of engage with society and how who we are and our unique backgrounds kind of contribute to kind of our participation in the world. And so for them it was like a no-brainer. They're like, we totally get this. And so I always had the most dynamic discussions and great great papers and great just fabulous students, because they just found it so relevant, you know.
I'm That is such an awesome background to go from being in such a terrible position to being someone who's, literally changing lives. But beyond the academic setting of where you work, you, when I was researching you, you mentioned enjoying spending time with your daughter and your three dogs. How does your personal aspect of your life influence your teaching philosophy, or the way you connect with students and the way you connect with juveniles at correctional facilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I'm a mom, you know. I became a mom super by choice and mostly on my own. I ended up single parenting, and she really was like the impetus for me to do good in the world, you know, and I just wanted to be a better human. And having her kind of just changed me. And so it's really easy for me to kind of extend like my mothering to my students. I don't know if it's really easy, but I do feel like sometimes I'm their mom, you know, because I care about them in a way that I think all teachers care about them. But I don't know. I'll make cookies for them and I'll do silly things like that. And so I think being a parent just helps me look at students holistically. They're somebody's kids, you know, and so I'd like them to feel safe and secure and free to learn and expand their minds in the classroom. And so I try to facilitate that as best as I can.
That's really heartwarming to hear. And I think it's so nice because it gives them hope that someone's gonna be there to, care for them and look out for them. So I think that's honestly really heartwarming. Something that's changed, I think, all of our lives is the COVID-19 pandemic, jumping back to a few years ago. But I think this pandemic has really reshaped the whole landscape of education in general. How have you adapted your teaching methods to create a supportive and engaging learning environment, especially in an online format?
Yeah, I think it's really I mean, the pandemic was an awful thing, but I think what it gave me and hopefully other educators is the reality that like students are multifaceted, students have a lot going on, and students are dealing with things that are really hard. And so I feel like I've humbled myself as a teacher in the sense that I don't take myself as seriously as I used to. And so I understand that students have a lot of other things going on, and I'm not going to get like offended or super disgruntled if they're having a struggle and they need extra time on an assignment, or if they end up dropping the class, but I just feel like having patience and calm with students is really important, and also reminding them that like self-care is really important. And so I usually build that in. Well, I build sorry about the dogs. I build it into all of my curriculum now. Self-care is a big piece of everything we do, in the sense that like, especially in my online classes where I don't get to kind of have face-to-face time with them as much, I always have assignments that are like, do this breathing exercise, and you get points for it. And so I'm kind of requiring that they take some time to be reflective and to do something good for themselves. Because I'm seeing so many kids in such distress, just with, just coming out of the pandemic. I don't know how old every one of you were, what grades you were in, but like just going from complete isolation to like, okay, go spend all this time in these classrooms with these people you don't know, talk in class, be part of the discussion, do this, do that. And people are like, I don't even know where to start with that. And I'm really uncomfortable. And so, I make it a point, I'd never call on people. I just don't do it. If people want to talk, they talk. And I put them in small groups. And if they talk to each other, great. And if they don't, like, I don't pressure them, because I just feel like just showing up is enough sometimes.
When I took sociology, sorry to cut you off. I know you're about to speak after Sophia, but when I took sociology in school, we did the same thing, and we did something called box breathing. And we did a lot of different breathing methods, meditations, collaborations, discussions. So I think it's pretty cool that you're implementing all of that.
Yeah, it's good for me. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
the self-care that I try to practice with myself, I want to share with others. So we always start with a breathing exercise and grounding ourselves,
It's important.
Yeah.
I really think that is really important, the breathing exercises and the self-care. But in your commitment to gender studies and intersectional feminism, how do you foster discussions that encourage people to challenge binary thinking and embrace the diversity within gender identities? Because I think that if in general people are misunderstood, they tend to output a sort of negative behavior to people and themselves as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really interesting because I've been teaching that gender studies class, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years now. And every year the students get more and more like aware of the challenge of the binary. They're like, yeah, of course, Susan, we know it's not a binary. We know it's a spectrum, and we know this and we know that. And it's just, I don't know where they're learning. And it brings me really a great joy, because sometimes I feel like I'm starting from zero with them, but the growth that's gone on through, I'm assuming through like social media and just people educating themselves and being curious. I mean, I don't know where you guys are, but I'm in Northern California, that is like very liberal and very, very inclusive in a lot of ways, not in every way, but so there's a lot of space for high schoolers to have these conversations in advance. But I continue just to debunk the binary in my conversations with students. And, we just have a lot of, we spend a good deal of time kind of learning about it. And it's really interesting because when you teach a gender class, you're often looking at the relationship, the power relationship, right, between genders, right? And so in some ways you're in this kind of false binary from the get-go, talking about inequality between men and women, but we're not even talking about non-binary folks in that discussion. But so it's sort of a both and, because it's important to make the point that there is this inequality, but then it's also important to have the conversation that the binary is pretty false. And then in terms of intersectionality, how women of color are treated based compared to white women, those sorts of things, how levels of ability, age, all the things intersect. And so teaching through that kind of lens is it opens up a lot of different conversations. And I think one thing that really is useful in that regard is like people can see themselves, they can find a piece of something that's more relatable to them. If we're talking about things in an intersectional lens, I think there's always somebody's identity. And I think a gender studies class, I don't know how it is for other schools, but it's predominantly not men in those classes, right? And men are usually afraid to take those classes because they think they're going to be male bashed or whatever. And so we always talk about the patriarchy, and we talk about how it's harmful, but we do it in a way that that I think makes everybody feel like they're still welcome. They are welcome, I guess I would say it that way. Because we need male allies on our team when we're trying to fight the power, because more people, the better when we're trying to change systems.
I completely get what you're saying in terms of inequality. And I know that your students might feel a certain way taking certain more feminist classes, which makes no sense to me. I feel like colors should not have genders, classes should not have genders. Pink should not be a girl's color, but these people have the access to education. So they have the ability to choose at least classes. So at least in that sense, they are in a better position. But I know that many people in the world don't have even an access to education. So as a member of the Zero Cost Task Force, what impact do you hope to see in terms of more access and equitable access to education? And how can this be expanded to benefit more students across different institutions, regions, places? And this also includes people stuck in the criminal justice system. Because going back to the gender disparity, I know women, especially in prison, also have a worse, I think, a lower education rate than those of men.
Mhm.
So what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so yeah, so there's less there's less availability to the AA programs in the women's prisons than there are in the men's prisons. So I'm speaking for California because that's where I do my work, but I think that that's shifting. So in terms of equity-minded kind of focus, programs that serve incarcerated people are growing and growing, and I can speak about that for sure because that's a huge part of my job right now. It's my favorite passion project right now. But like in terms of zero cost textbook, so that is a project that I started at the college a couple years ago. And basically, in terms of why people don't have access to college is because it costs a lot of money, right? And so even if you get, in California, we have something called the Board of Governors fee waiver. So you get tuition free, but you still have to pay for rent. You still have to pay for everything else. And so books are a ridiculous amount of money. And so, and they don't need to be, right? It's a textbook manufacturers kind of that are making a lot of money off of this information that in my mind ought to be open education, open source, right? By the people, for the people. So I teach all my classes with that zero cost in mind. None of my classes have book fees. I wrote 2 books over my last sabbatical, one for a human sexuality class and one for a race and ethnicity class. And so I'm using both of those books in the classes I'm teaching. And then I use other open source books in all of my other classes. And that's just my commitment. I don't ever have any cost associated with my materials, And then if you're thinking about like how to like expand out the equity, California is really looking towards doing a lot of kind of outreach into the prisons and into the jails and into the juvenile halls to get education in there, kind of education, not incarceration is sort of like the kind of tagline that everybody's sort of going with these days. And so I am the faculty advisor for my on-campus group of incarcerated students. And so we have a cohort of about 20 students. Last fall, there was a grant opportunity to bring money to fund kind of this sort of programming at the college. And I was able to apply for the grant and we got it. And so that allows us to have cash aid for our students. We have weekly meetings. Tomorrow is our sort of celebration feast as a group, which is going to be really lovely. And they have been really supportive of each other. And it's just been a really nice community because for those students coming out of incarceration, the thought of college at first felt like not an option for them. And to just have kind of the opportunity for them to reimagine what's possible it's been really neat to watch. And so, yeah, so that's a very, very important piece of my work. And then the second piece that sort of ties into that is those students that I work with on campus have now become peer mentors and they go into juvenile hall with me. and they mentor the students in juvenile hall. And so that's a second grant that I got this year, which is really exciting. It's a 5-year grant to teach inside juvenile hall, and to get those high school students, what we call in California dual enrollment. So they will be getting college credit going towards their graduation, towards their high school units. And once they come out of high school, they'll already have some college units under their belt, which is, pretty neat. So those kids in the hall, they just really, they never imagined college. And for me to go in with this group of peer mentors who had been incarcerated just like them, some of them juvenile kids, when they were juveniles, to sit down with these currently detained youth and to just be able to share, like, I know college seems really weird, but it's actually, you'd be surprised how great it is. And so, maybe getting a little mind shift in them to like decide that that would be something worth trying. And the funding is so critical, because it's definitely, we've been able to offer, like, we have another thing that's really hard in California is housing. Housing is so expensive. It's so ridiculous. Students are having a tough time coming out of the system and getting into housing. And I don't know how it is everywhere, but in California, you can't apply for government housing if you have a record. And so they can't even get into affordable housing. Not that there's much of it anyways, but, this whole idea that, they're getting a second chance, it's not really a second chance. It's not a viable second chance without legitimate access to these resources, right? And so what equity measures are there in place? Housing is still one of our hugest problems. But we've been able to fund some students with emergency rent and different things like that, so that they're not unhoused, because clearly if you don't have a safe place to lay your head at night, you're not going to be successful in school.
It's honestly really inspiring to hear that you've helped so many people turn their lives around. And I'm just really relieved that there's, there's at least one person out there who's really helping them turn their lives around and, really gaining that redemption that after incarceration. So I'm really happy to hear that. Given your experience in special education services and your work with correctional facilities, could you share an example of how these experiences have informed your approach to restorative services at Road to Empowerment?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I've learned what not to do by being in correctional facilities, if I'm going to be perfectly honest, because a lot of the engagement and the interactions that I see between corrections staff and, incarcerated people is, I mean, I wouldn't want to be treated the way they treat them a lot of the times. And so I also don't have, decades of experience working in a facility. So mad respect for people that choose to do that. But I've seen people do it. I have seen people do it in the juvenile hall with loving care. And I've just wondered, well, why can't everybody kind of approach them that way? And I know that there's trust issues and people have, different reasons behind needing to protect themselves, which I totally understand. But in terms of like what works, I mean, just what I've seen people come out of the system and I've seen people thrive. And they've thrived because they've had support, and opportunity. And so, I mean, I think that's just what most people need, is support and opportunity and the ability to kind of find what they're good at and then be supported in pursuing it. And so, that's kind of what this nonprofit Road to Empowerment is all about, is we want to figure out different ways to support people both coming out of the system, but then my co-founder is incarcerated still, and he works inside to kind of work on different groups and different projects that help people kind of prepare for life on the outside.
Sorry about that. That was my dog. But wow, I can tell that your academic interests span a wide range of social justice topics. Can you discuss how you integrate these areas such as decolonization work and dismantling the prison system into your teachings?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important that I just teach about them, you know. I as a sociologist, I have to say, like, I'm lucky because it sort of lends itself to that, right? So I wrote a book called A People's History of Structural Racism in Academia from A to Z, basically. And I like highlighted the different ways in which different like disciplines have structural racism built into them. And what I was trying to do is offer to other faculty to use it in their classes. Like, oh, you teach architecture. Well, here's a blurb about that. Maybe you could throw that in there. And, I think like they all kind of said to me, that's great, Susan, but like we have all this we have to cover. So we really don't have time for that. And so I am fortunate because in sociology, it absolutely gets to be part of my curriculum. So I'm always talking about mass incarceration. We did this great awareness raising campus wide about a year ago, and we did another one this year where we bring in documentaries about life after incarceration. And we have a panel of speakers, and my students who aren't formally incarcerated usually find this really fascinating and really expanding. And I've taken them on prison tours before so that they can kind of see what it's like to be inside of a total institution. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just about awareness raising and kind of showing the students what is actually out there. And it's always applying theory to practice and kind of showing them real world examples, because for me, that's always how I learned. So, if I'm teaching about, like the prison industrial complex, I'm going to like show them the documentary The 13th, or I'm going to show them a different documentary, or I'm going to take them on a trip, or I'm going to bring in a guest speaker, because I think that just kind of helps kind of round out the understanding and make it more real, if that makes any sense.
Well,
I mean,
oh, so sorry.
no, continue.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And again, I'm so sure that you have had such a positive impact on the people, students, and incarcerated individuals that you worked with. Those are all the questions we have for you today. But thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights and perspectives. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to share with our listeners?
I mean, I would just say that like whatever I give them, they give me back times 1,000, like we all are learning together. And I think that's what makes my job so beautiful, is that I get to learn from them and they get to learn from me. And I feel like we can learn and care for each other in a way that's respectful and mindful. And I think that's what makes my job so awesome. But yeah, I'm glad you guys are doing this work. I know you don't have time, but I want to know more, and I'm excited that you guys are choosing this topic, and congratulations on making it happen, and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Yeah.
Well, to the listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Second Chance Stories of Young Offenders. Until next time, remember that your story is still being written and that there's always hope for a brighter future. Stay tuned.